Hi, May 40 here. So Steve Saylor's just given an interview over YouTube. I wonder how long he'll stay up on YouTube. He's talking to Patrick Casey. So I don't recall Steve Saylor ever giving a powerful or compelling interview. I don't recall ever hearing anything new from Steve Saylor in the interview format. So I'm very eager to hear Steve Saylor interviews. I just don't recall ever learning anything from them, but maybe this one will be different.
I imagine that the deaths of exuberance had something to do with more money being in the hands of people who aren't the most responsible spenders. But yeah, the deaths of exuberance, of car crashes and homicides, this is an important development in 21st century social science. And it rhymes with the really important finding in 2015 by the economists Ann Case and Cecil Deaton that the white working class life expectancy was dropping due to what they call deaths of despair, like suicide, cirrhosis of the liver, and opioid dropping due to overdoses. So the American elite helped launch in 2020 an increase in deaths of exuberance, especially among blacks, but increasingly among Hispanics in 2021, 2022. If you just project out the 2019 rates of these two kinds of deaths, by 2021, probably about a little over 10,000 more blacks died in murders and car crashes than if the 2019 rate had continued. So here, midway through 2023, we're probably up to something like 25,000 incremental black deaths. That wouldn't have happened. That probably wouldn't have happened without the racial reckoning of 2020. So heck of a job, Black Lives Matter. Now, I try to publicize this. Why? Well, I don't like people dying violently. I'm an anti-murderite. I'm an anti-car crashist. I don't want my fellow American citizens to have their lives ended at a young age. I also want people to know about this so that they don't fall for it a fourth time. We fell for this in the 60s. We fell for it in 2014 after Ferguson. We sure fell for it with the Floyd effect of 2020. Let's not do that again. Let's learn about it. And also, I have this feeling that all the people in influential, powerful positions who went all in on the racial reckoning in 2020 deserve a reckoning of their own. They need to be called out and shamed in the public sphere for screwing up this badly. You're supposed to be the smart intellectuals who know about stuff, and you advocated a completely self-defeating set of policies and set of emotions. All right.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off there. I wasn't sure if there was more. It was excellent stuff.
Like my columns in Talkies magazine, I tend to end my conversational gambits rather abruptly. I could be going on, but
no, it's perfectly fine. There's another question I wanted to ask you somewhat related to that. I wanted to say, if anyone has, we will save time for questions at the end. entropystream.live/Patrick Casey for anyone in the audience who wants to support my work, ask a question of Mr. Saylor. And of course, I would encourage you guys to follow him on Twitter if you haven't already, but I'm sure you already are. So, well, related to that, so we're talking about the fact that there actually are cultural components to crime. I think some people get a little too carried away with the HBD stuff, the genetics. Obviously, there's a lot of truth to that.
So every video interview I've seen with Steve Saylor, he does it in a closet. So I expect he doesn't have a large, luxurious house.
But people should keep in mind as well that policy, culture, that these things absolutely can mold these crime rates and outcomes as well. Now,
exactly.
my perspective is that
the American genetics did not change on May 25th, 2020, but a whole bunch of social statistics did change within like a week or 2 weeks. And so, yeah, stuff like policing is very political. And what the political attitudes of the time have a lot to do with what the crime rate's going to be.
Absolutely. So to whatever extent genetics plays a role in crime and outcomes, which it certainly does, group differences, of course, exist. I think it's important for everyone to, if you take one thing away from this episode, it's that how we handle these differences can have a world of impact on crime rates and all sorts of other things. So,
No, Steve Saylor doesn't live in a closet. He owns a home. He's got a yard. He's got a dog. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids. But he does his interviews in a closet.
I mean, our culture has basically driven out of the Overton window, scholars like Charles Murray, as this is unthinkable that there are these long-running differences between the races in their tendency to behave in certain fashions. So there's nothing left other than to tell. So what we're left with is basically Ibram X. Kendi's explanation that anything that happens, anything that blacks do, is the fault of evil white oppression. Now, this is kind of hard to argue that whites have been getting more oppressive over the last 60 years, but what they just do is they crank up the antiquarianism. There's more coverage of Emmett Till today than there was in 1970. We live in a society that is obsessed lately with certain kinds of history. So we have all of these months devoted to the history of white people being mean to blacks, to gays, to Asian American Pacific Islanders has now become a big deal over the last few years.
Mr. Saylor, I hate to interrupt. Well, actually, just as I said that, your video came back. You were frozen until the moment that I said that for a minute or two there. So you're fine. You're fine now. I was thinking I don't want to interrupt him. He's really dropping some good takes. And the minute that I said that, it corrected itself. So please continue.
All right. Hang on a second. I'll be right back. I'm going to crank up the air conditioner. I'm concerned that I have like the last MacBook before they went over to the new Apple low energy chips.
Okay.
It just generates a giant amount of heat. So I'm going to crank up the house air conditioner.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Did you guys see that? I'm looking over and I'm thinking the video is okay. We're back. Very good.
So what our society has become worse at is noticing what's going on right now. I mean, for example, as far as I can tell, nobody has in the press, in the national press, has noticed the double test of my theory.
So yeah, way too much discussion, I think, about where Steve Saylor lives and his living situation, how many people are living with him. Let's leave that alone. One advice I've seen for live streamers is only show one part of your home. Like, don't show a bunch of different parts of your home. Somehow that encourages stalkers.
That anti-police movements like Black Lives Matter boost both homicides and traffic fatalities, and that they did it both after Ferguson, and they did it especially after Floyd.
Yeah, Steve is bringing this on himself by doing an interview repeatedly in his closet. Right? I think that's a really poor choice on his part. It's so strange that it provokes people talking about it. You really want to do kind of an anodyne place to do your interviews so that the attention is not on where you're doing them, and doing them in a closet is a really poor idea on many levels.
That's 4 tests of that theory, and it sure looks like it's passed with flying colors. So you see a certain amount of coverage of like, why are shootings way up? Oh, it must be COVID or gun sales or something like that. And then you see other coverage like, why are car crashes up? It must be because American roads aren't designed the right way. And maybe there's some truth to some of those things, like American roads, but it doesn't explain why 55% more blacks died in car crashes in June 2020.
Yeah, does he really need to have like a 10-year-old laptop computer? Surely he can upgrade. I would just think the frustrations of dealing with such an old computer would be a poor husbanding of resources.
Then in June 2019, these are just gigantic numbers, and the design of the road isn't going to have anything to do with it. It's all going to have to do with behavior, which is driven by attitudes and by policing. So,
So I got a Corsair computer, a desktop, not a laptop. 5 years ago, it still runs so sweet, so fast. I bought 36 of RAM, so lots of memory. No worries. I mean, I expect that as soon as it starts to give out in any way, I'm just going to spring for another one. But I bought a portable air conditioner based on Horsey English's super chats 5 years ago. Great investment. I mean, makes a real difference in the quality of my life, because otherwise it just gets pretty hot here in this room. But now I get to keep it chill, and it only runs like 5 cents an hour increase to the electricity bill.
Basically, the press doesn't want to talk about it because then it raises this question like, oh, yeah, we got all excited about Black Lives Matter, and then we got all these Black lives murdered. maybe you guys shouldn't have trusted.
So, yeah, Saylor really relies on caffeine. He says that's where he gets most of his ideas, after a lot of caffeine and decent sleep. The problem is the caffeine will mitigate and militate against the sleep. So I encourage him to try modafinil, but to the best of my knowledge, he has not.
Us.
Hmm.
So with modafinil, you get a much milder version of the caffeine high, but there's no crash. It lasts about 15 hours, and then it gently goes away, and it doesn't have any of the nasty effects of coffee.
Nobody wants to talk about it.
Well,
But yeah, in general, we know more. We talk more about, the Tulsa race massacre 100 years ago than what did the Black Lives Matter massacres that have been ongoing ever since BLM's emergence. I gave a speech at a VDARE conference, which you can find online, the video. I called it The Secret History of the 21st Century. It's a whole bunch of things that happened in plain sight involving some of the biggest events of this century, like 9/11, the 2008 housing crash.
So if you're a regular reader of his blog, you're not going to find anything new in the speech.
Or the George Floyd events. And, here's a completely different interpretation than the ones you've been told. And it's all documented, but you're not going to hear about it.
Right.
All right.
Very good. Well, I wanted to ask you more broadly, why do you think the subject of group differences, the realities of race and crime, are so suppressed? Do you think that much of the liberal, woke, call it what you want, status quo, the interests of the people promoting this, do you think that, is it all entirely dependent on an erroneous understanding of man, of groups?
The most successful anti-crime drive in recent American history took place in the center of American liberalism and media power, New York City, in the Giuliani, Bloomberg, and Braden era that goes up into de Blasio's term. People forget that de Blasio, when he became mayor, immediately appointed as his police commissioner, Giuliani's first police commissioner, Bill Braden. New York City did an amazing job of just driving down the number of murders year after year. And they did it largely through what I call point of use gun control rather than point of sale gun control. Now, when liberals talk about gun control, what they have in mind is what they want to do is they want to stop rural rednecks from going to the store and buying those scary rifles. That's the important thing to do. All right, well, New York City basically outlawed gun sales maybe 100 years ago. So it's always had point of sale gun control. That didn't stop New Yorkers from shooting each other, 2,000 murder victims a year in the early 90s. What they then emphasized was in a stretch in which the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York was defeated 5 consecutive times, twice by Giuliani, 3 times by Bloomberg, running either as a Republican or as an independent, was they concentrated on point of use gun control, that keep lowlifes from packing their pistols when they go out, and make sure that they keep them locked away at home. And they managed to make the criminal class of New York more scared of the NYPD than of other criminals. So people stopped carrying guns around. And that had a lot of nice effects. And so, but then after George Floyd, all across the country, murders immediately leapt upward. Chicago had the most murders in its rather famously murderous history on May 31st, 2020, 6 days after George Floyd's death. It took till about the middle of June for criminals in New York to realize, wow, we don't need to be as scared of the NYPD as we've been for the last 15 years. Let's bring my gun along to that party. So shootings finally started going up in New York City. My point is, though, that the voters of New York carried out very rationally and over a long period of time a tremendous job of conservative governance. Now, the question is, does anybody remember that? And can the rest of the country, realize that what we need to do is don't talk like New Yorkers, don't believe their rhetoric, believe their actions when they defended their city and they made New York City much, much safer than it had been in 50 years. And, they've thrown a lot of that away. Now, here's a question, is it good for urban liberals, what they've been doing? And the answer is no, it's disastrous. It's going to hurt their property values. It's going to make their lives worse. It's going to get themselves attacked more. It's going to drive them out of big cities to the suburbs. This has been happening.
Patrick Casey is an interesting story. He was head of Identity Europa. Then he threw in with Nick Fuentes and seems to have avoided the imprisonment and law enforcement harassment that other leaders of the dissident riot have endured. And he's doing his own thing, inching towards respectability.
Why do they want to do this? And the answer is, and people like to come up with complex reasons about how this is in somebody's self-interest, that they made up a giant plan. But no, I think the answer is mostly our public discourse has been getting stupider, more childish over the years, and we're inflicting disasters on ourselves because we increasingly don't think about how the world.
So I don't think this is a good answer here by Steve Saylor. There are a lot of painful repercussions to accepting that different groups have different gifts, right? It would completely shake up the foundations of most people's worldviews, of the elite, of the intellectual, cognitive elite, right? The major institutions of our country, the way that we legislate and enforce law. It would provoke a very painful adjustment. And so it's not that public discourse has become stupider, right? The reason that very smart people don't want to talk about group differences is because of the very painful repercussions of completely reassessing how you conduct a society, how you can conduct institutions, how you legislate, how you just conduct the foundations of a worldview, right? It gets completely shaken up by the acceptance of group differences. So I don't buy Steve Saylor's explanation here.
Works in many kind of realistic terms. We think about it in terms of good guys and bad guys. The good guys are the people who were disprivileged before the 1960s and have been increasingly privileged ever since, and they deserve more privilege. And the bad guys are the people who remind the good guys of the privilege from before the 60s, even if they're 17 years old. So all we're able to do.
Yes, Steve Saylor does all his video interviews from a closet. I've never seen an exception from his own home. Now, he was on NBC News about 10 years ago. I suspect he didn't do that interview in his closet.
One of my theories is that a lot of this has to do with kind of the grand strategy of the Democratic Party, but that's probably assigning more intelligence and
yeah, Steve Saylor, a great analyst, but he's not adding anything. He's not getting here the very painful reasons why very smart people refuse to accept group differences.
And thinking to what the Democrats are up to. Basically, the Democrats are facing a country that's becoming more diverse, and they've set themselves up to be the party of diversity. So they're constantly, they encourage, without necessarily even noticing what they're doing, more diversity through immigration or through creating new identity groups like the sacred transgenders. All right. And
so has Steve Saylor explained why he does all these interviews in a closet? I think he even writes, this is his office. He types here in this office, and he hasn't gone into much explanation, but this is just where he works, in a closet. He types his blog in a closet, I believe.
And the Republicans are stuck kind of being the party of the declining set of core Americans, the people who demographically resemble George Washington and Ben Franklin. So it should be a winning strategy for the Democrats. But one problem with it is what unites this coalition of the fringes that they've assembled. What brings together the Muslims and the transgenders and the Latinos and the secular, the liberal Jews, and et cetera, of all these people who feel themselves somewhat alienated from the core of America, of the American people. And the only answer they've been able to come up with so far is hating on core Americans. Let's unite our coalition of the margins, supposedly marginalized, by fear and loathing of white male, straight, homeowning, conservative core Americans. To some extent, it's a very effective policy, but it just destroys democratic liberal ability to manage even their own cities. You know, for a long time, I like to point out liberal hypocrisy. It's kind of like, oh, liberal New Yorkers, they talk a good game, but they actually did an excellent job of cleaning up crime in New York City, so good for them. And then, Harvard professors talk a good game about equality, but they use SAT scores to find smart kids. Good for them. Yeah. And then eventually, 2020 was kind of the point where liberal hypocrisy was no longer. That liberals decided that liberal hypocrisy was no longer tolerable. They had to walk their talk, and that has not been good for American cities. It's been fine, out in the suburbs mostly, et cetera. But it's not good, and it's not good for urbane liberal Americans. But it's very, very hard for them to come out and talk about what actually happened, because A, it would show that they screwed up really badly, and B, they've basically decided that some things are too horrible to ever be mentioned, like differences in crime rates and so forth. And this has become central to their worldview. Mm-hmm. So that there's all of these truths out there that they will not acknowledge, that acknowledging is the sign of badness, and that in the increasingly childish way that public discourse is carried on these days, there's just two kinds of people. There's bad people and there's good people. Bad people notice things like racial differences in crime. Good people do not. The good people are the good people, and they deserve to win. And this is basically like the way 6-year-olds decide who are the good guys on their favorite cartoons.
Right.
Good guys. Everybody knows.
It's very tribal, definitely. Well, I wanted to ask you, Mr. Saylor, do you think that there's a lot of debate on Twitter as to whether or not we'll ever reach a point where everyone, or most people, including elites, are willing to acknowledge and accept that some degree of group differences in outcomes are the result of genetics? If I recall correctly, I think years ago, and probably since, but I saw years ago, you argue that you seem fairly optimistic that people might be able to accept these differences one day and have it not be a big deal. Others have taken a more critical position. They're not very hopeful of such a thing happening. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a sports fan from way back. I probably, when I was 9 years old, I went to a college football game at the Coliseum, and the stars were two All-American running backs. One was a white guy named Bill Enyart, who was super strong and not that fast, and he had a really good game. But in the second half, USC came back and won on O.J. Simpson's 239 yards rushing, because O.J. was strong and he was really fast and shifty. And I said, oh, that's an interesting pattern. Let's see if it's true elsewhere. I probably didn't talk exactly in those terms when I was 9, but yeah, I started looking for patterns like that and went, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, probably blacks tend to be better running backs, especially in the open field, whereas whites are still pretty good at the short yardage, pounded in from the 1 yard line type thing. All right. And then, yeah, blacks tend to make better wide receivers because they're faster, but whites with good hands and run good routes can still do well. But then what about the other side, cornerbacks, the defenders? And that's becoming ever more all in all black. So, there hasn't been a non-black cornerback on the 32 NFL teams to be the starter at the beginning of the season in 20 seasons now. All right, so in the world of sports, there's a lot of really obvious stuff. If you watch the 2021 Olympics was the first one in which a non-black, a Chinese runner, made the men's 100-meter dash finals since 1980. So it's been 79 out of 80 of the last people who make it through the first few rounds to the final 8 in the Olympic 100-meter dash to be the world's fastest man have had at least one sub-Saharan African parent. All right, and has the world blown up because you can turn on your TV and see this all the time? No, sports are popular, or more popular than ever. People get along fine. There's all sorts of interesting patterns you can look for. Questions like why are major league right fielders much blacker than major league third basemen? Interesting. There's just all sorts of stuff like that. It's interesting. The world goes on. Nobody massacres each other over it. So I had a lot of hope that reasonable people, as I like to think myself, could go on and go, okay, and here are other patterns we see that are fairly similar to what we see in sports. And, we need to accommodate these differences and not have unrealistic expectations of what would happen if we do X, Y, or Z. nothing that's happened since I went to that football game in 1969 has changed my mind about, the basically about how the world works. But it's just become ever more verboten that it would be the worst thing in the world if Charles Murray and Steve Saylor turned out to be, pretty right about a lot of important things. And therefore, we must search out any hypocritical agreement with their worldview and destroy it. Not just destroy them, but we white liberals must purge ourselves of any sort of racial realism and stop behaving, stop like if a white woman feels threatened by a black man, to, don't call the police. We got to stop doing stuff like that. That's racist. That would be reasonable in Steve Saylor's worldview.
Right.
How's that working out for him? Not so great lately. But if you build your entire status system around, in this home we believe, and then you list a bunch of nonsense, you can carry on for a while. If you're not going to worry about the victims of your wrong views, if you're going to worry about Emmett Till but not about thousands of people who have incrementally died since George Floyd, really in the tens of thousands, due to just intellectual wrongness drifting into public policy, you can go on for quite a while. So the world has gotten ever more concerned that they can't admit this fact. So here's my offer about the double effect, the Ferguson-Floyd traffic fatality homicide effect, which is, I discovered it back about 2 years ago, but you can write all the academic papers you want and never cite my name. Just take it and run with it. This is too important for you to worry about crediting a crime thinker who's banished from polite society. Don't mention me. Just go for it. This is the biggest thing that's happened in the domestic social statistics in this decade. And write your papers, publish it, and it's not important that you credit me.
Very good. Well, anyone watching here, anyone with a promising academic career, you've been given express permission by Mr. Saylor to run with some of these ideas, and even not.
Okay, just notice the tremendous difference in attitude between Steve Saylor and those on the distant right who are just happy to see America burn down, to see France just burn down. So Steve Saylor is not happy to see America burn down. He's not happy about tens of thousands of extra deaths. Okay, contrast that with the approach of Jean-Francois Gariepy, who moved to the extreme north of Canada, and Gariepy's advice to people is just let it all burn down. He's fine with just letting it all go, and many other people have this same attitude on the distant right. They're just happy to see everything just burn down. Here he plays Papacito, French commentator, on how people should just let it all burn down. And great, now that Twitter is not loading. Come on, man, I'm just about to play you.
F. Younger was saying, I wish the American right was this smart.
Okay, so JF here, he thinks the smart approach is to not give a damn about your country burning down. Right, I don't think that's
French far-right influencer Papacito to his followers, do not intervene, let the Republic go to the end of its logic. I want to review this full video because he expresses so well what I would want to say to you guys and what has been my position for years. It is absolutely beautifully said, so let's get started. I will read in English above his French voice.
Bonjour les amis, je reçois beaucoup de messages qui me disent qu'est-ce qu'on fait.
I'm receiving lots of messages asking what should we do?
Qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire? Est-ce qu'il faut intervenir?
Should we intervene? We can't let it happen.
So just notice the grandiosity that this Papacito guy thinks that if he and his friends intervened, that they could very well save France, but he's counseling his followers don't intervene. So he believes he has the power to save his entire nation, but he thinks it's for the best if his supporters don't intervene. And Jean-Francois has a similar perspective that Jean-Francois is sitting, in isolated northern Canada, and he's just waiting to take power like Charles de Gaulle in the 1950s, just waiting to be recalled to power.
You guys don't get it. We need to be smart. France is a country which is very attached to its regime, the Republic. and yet it owes what is happening right now to this regime. If you intervene now, you will actually come to the rescue of this regime. You will rescue this regime, which is teetering under its own indulgence. There's been so much indulgence towards certain people that they now feel invincible. All this laxity is making the regime fall. Intervening now is to come to the rescue.
So Jean-Francois Gariepy and Steve Saylor and Charles Murray have pretty similar understandings of the reality of group differences. But Charles Murray, Steve Saylor have a lot of people that they love. They have lives that are intertwined with other Americans, and they don't want to see America go up in flames. Contrast that with a Papacito and a Jean-Francois, who apparently is not terribly connected to other people. And so both Papacito and JF seem quite happy to see the United States or Canada, France just absolutely destroy themselves and go up in flames.
To a regime and to a people who firstly voted to perpetuate this regime, and furthermore, who voted for Emmanuel Macron. So to see you guys about to help them, I realize there really is an issue. The European of a century ago understood these things. Now,
and the chat says, I'm sympathetic to this position of just letting the regime burn down. The level of demoralization our cultural and political elites have engaged in is frankly disgusting. Well, think about people you love and people who love you. Think about the hundreds of thousands, the millions of lives that would be ended abruptly by just everything burning down. All right, it should not be a position that commands your sympathy and respect.
Be perfectly clear. You must leave the hordes of Huns, ransack the residences of people who voted for Emmanuel Macron. Now they're reaching the city centers, the suburbs, the places full of boomers who voted for Macron, boomers who don't care about leaving your country in shambles. Those very same boomers are being faced with hordes of Huns. You shouldn't intervene now. Now you must leave misinformed people discover reality for themselves without the BFM TV filter. I have to tell you, I'm gloating.
So let everyone discover reality for themselves, because you, Papacito, you have cracked reality. You know what reality is. Jean-Francois knows reality. Look, the best of us only have intimations, glimmerings of some aspects of reality. Reality is far more complicated than anything that we can, fully get our hands around.
For 10 days, they've been explaining that I was a threat to the Republic, to democracy. A bunch of journalists really said that. To see now what really threatened the Republic. It's great. Let it happen. How do you expect the French to understand?
Okay, so why does this person think it's great that the country is burning down? Do you think that he has close ties to his family? Do you think he's married with children? Do you think he has close relationships with his extended family, his community, his church? Do you think he has extensive, friendship ties? Right? Do you think he is established in a career, in hobbies, in charity work? No. Anyone with any level, anything approaching a normal level of human connection would not be completely cool with his city and his community and his country just going up in flames. You have to be antisocial and completely disconnected, and then get almost all your meaning in life from your political crusade and your sense of arrogance that you really understand reality.
If they never get a spanking. It's like children. Boomers are like children. They need to experience the catastrophe in their flesh to understand what's going on, what's at stake in France right now. So what's going on right now is a godsend. We've got to let the Republic go to the end of its logic. What the suburbs are doing right now, of course, the motive is bullshit. They don't ransack when one of their own kill our children or shut up a Bataclan, but that's just the way it is. But you have to be strategic, and I remind you that we're Europeans. Right now, they're doing the job for us. It's perfect. They're way more effective than any political video. I made a little video to try to show how rotten was the Republic.
Okay, so compared to a perspective of, we must go out into the streets and confront armed rioters and hold up signs saying stealing is violating God's 10 Commandments, and I think that's even a worse strategy. So between having an exaggerated sense of your own importance so that you go out into the streets confronting, rioters and looters, all right, that's absolutely terrible. So your first responsibility should be to your family, and then to your extended family and your community. But people want to fall down on either side of an extreme, right? One extreme is to think that they can just completely change the nature of reality, that they can go out there and they can change the world. They can band together with their friends, like Dennis Prager says. He wants to shape the future of America. He feels like he can save the Bible and keep it alive for future generations. All right, this is an absurd level of overconfidence about how much influence you can have. On the other hand, you should pray for the welfare of the government. It's a basic Jewish teaching that I subscribe to, from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, from the Mishnah 2,000 years ago. Rabbi Hanina teaches, pray for the welfare of the government, for were it not for the fear it inspires, every man would swallow his neighbor alive. Right. This is a rabbi teaching when Jews and Romans are constantly at each other's throats. They go through two very intense wars that mark the end of the rise of the Roman Empire, and well over 1 million Jews die in these wars. So this is not someone speaking out of a naive understanding of reality and a naive understanding of the cruelty and the downsides of Roman rule. But you want even bad government. Almost always bad government is preferable to anarchy. Pray for the welfare of the government, for were it not for the fear it inspires, every man would swallow his neighbor alive. Or as political philosopher Thomas Hobbes put it in the 17th century, life without government would be nasty, brutish, and short. So to say that you're happy to see the government burn down is essentially to side off on the mass slaughter of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of your fellow citizens, fellow members of your nation.
They're doing 1,000 times better. They're humiliating it, even internationally. We're 1 year away from the Olympic Games, and here's what France is, what everyone sees on TV. So let it
Yes, a multicultural, anti-white, rainbow flag waving government is preferable to no government.
be. After a while, they'll call people like us, to come and clean up. For now, just sit tight.
Yeah, this guy's delusional, thinking that the elites are going to call people like him, Papacito and Jean-Francois, to come and clean up the mess. Right? People like Richard Spencer and other dissident right leaders believe that eventually the government's going to turn to them to clean up the mess.
This police force that helped this regime so much during the COVID is now sent by the same regime to contain the Huns, with contempt to boot, since Emmanuel Macron condemned the policeman who did his job. And the police don't want to strike. They can't.
The French overall have a pretty high quality of life, right? The French overall are pretty happy and feel awesome about being French. France definitely has its problems, but overall life in France is not a hellscape.
For reasons of status, money, so they won't strike. So the Republic is faced with a dilemma. It has its Huns and its policemen.
And the chat says they'll call on the saps to watch football and endure regime punishment beatings. No, they'll call on the police and, if necessary, the armed forces, who are plenty capable of, I would expect, to get a rein on this eventually. So our ruling elites are not idiots, and they do not completely lack aptitude and competence. They're not going to call on Papacito and Jean-Francois Gariepy and Richard Spencer to clean this up. They will turn this over to trained professionals in the police and possibly in the armed forces.
Men who are in the process of fighting each other. The Huns shouldn't go too far and the cops shouldn't break. But in the current logic, the Huns and further and the policemen are likely to crack. So your first instinct is to defend your country, but you won't defend it. You'll defend a regime, and you'll allow the far left to say, oh, look, there's this political...
Okay, Luke's making some good challenges here. We must support a government that promotes chaos and anarchy to stop chaos and anarchy. We should recognize that having police is better than not having police, right? Even if the police are celebrating things that you don't agree with, and even if the government celebrates some things that you think are terrible, right? Where on earth do you think it's better, right? You live in the United Kingdom. So where on earth do you think it's better than what's going on in the United Kingdom France, Germany, the United States, Canada. Like, where are these much more blessed, much more free, much more prosperous societies? I can't think of any. So whatever problems that France has and Canada has and the United States and the United Kingdom have, you still have life better than 99.9% of people who've ever lived, and you still have life better than 98% of people who are alive today. And so I would think that should inculcate some sense of gratitude that for all the flaws of the government and the elites, and I probably agree with most of your critiques of them, they still provide you a quality of life that's better than 98% of people elsewhere in the world. Oh, Singapore and Japan, well, move there. Move there. Right? Life in Singapore is no walk in the park. Right? It's a pretty tough place to adjust to. Japan has no interest in you moving there. So, where else on earth are they going to take you in and be happy about you moving there? The quality of life is declining. Okay, compared to where? Where do you think the quality of life is so much better? Do you really think the quality of life is just dramatically better in Singapore and Japan? I know people who live in Singapore, and I know people who live in Japan, and there are plenty of ways that life in Singapore and Japan is better. Just like I was in Australia, and there's virtually no crime. There's, compared to the United States, high social trust and high social cohesion. So those are some ways that life in Australia is much better than in the United States. On the other hand, if I moved to Australia, right, I would earn about 60% as much money, and my living expenses would be twice as much as they are in America, right? 67 American cents gets you $1 Australian dollar, right? Australia, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Europe are in for very tough times economically, right? Life in America is far more prosperous, far more free, and is on a far better trajectory, right? The United States is going to continue to dominate the world, even outstrip its competitors in the decades ahead.
Group fighting this ethnic group. And that's not at all desirable because they'll once again be the referee. Now that's over. Now they have to be involved. Did you saw what happened to Martins Bilongo? He tried to meet the rioters thinking that all of Edify's submissiveness was going to pay off, and he got beat up with a crutch.
So yeah, I live in West LA. There's virtually no crime here, right? Virtually no crime in West LA, virtually no crime in Beverly Hills. There's virtually no crime in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. No, it's a very competitive life. You have to work really hard, and you have to essentially earn six figures to be able to live in nice areas.
That's what's going to happen to the far left in the next few days. They're going to be beaten with crutches. You'll note that I profess.
And the chat says you need to visit the United Kingdom again. 40 is turning into a pit. Yeah, a lot of problems in the United Kingdom, but still life is better, I would expect, than 98% of places on Earth.
That people in the countryside would be safe from such things, and they are. It's all happening in the cities. I warned you a long time ago, go to the country. Normally, people our age in the country are conservative. They know why they left the cities. So it's all very well for...
I don't know about you, but I love to live my life around writers and professors and philosophers. And these people overwhelmingly live in cities. I also want to live my life around Orthodox Jews. Where can you go where you can go to, social gatherings of writers, pretty much every night of the week, right? You can only do that in a big city, right? There are all sorts of, opportunities in a city that are simply not available for people in the country, right? Yeah, go to the country if you like it, but most people who enjoy life in the city are not going to be thrilled with life in the country.
For the countryside to be spared, if you live in the country, you won't have riots. And if a rioter shows up, you've got all the tools you need. Not so much in the city. Right now, they're tearing down apartments of centrist and far leftist. These people look out their windows and see fire with Huns dancing around. Absolutely beautiful statement by Papachito. I didn't even know this guy, apparently.
Yeah, for Jean-Francois, this is beautiful because Jean-Francois, like Papacito, also wants to stay on the sidelines, stay in a remote area and just watch everything burn down. Right? If you love people and have people who love you, you're not going to be at ease with your society going up in flames. Right? A very different perspective than that of Steve Saylor or Charles Murray, who are still highly invested in America.
He's a far-right guy. I should know, but I didn't know this guy. But my God, is that what I think? We are faced with a situation in which we have absolutely no interest at intervening one side or the other. It is.
Wait. Who's asking you to intervene? Right? I agree. There's no need for ordinary people to intervene. You should take care of your family. You should do your job. You should take care of your community. You should take care of your extended family. You should develop skills and pursue your interests. And you should volunteer and help out people, do charity work, help people out 5, 10, 15 hours a week. I think almost everyone should make a few hours a week at least to help other people out. No one's calling on randos on far right Twitter and the right wing sections of YouTube and social media to save a burning society. This is pure delusion, right? This idea of we should force ourselves to stand back. No one's asking you to intervene in what are criminal matters. These are policing matters. Right? These are matters for the police, and our leaders, our elites, our politicians, even on the left, right? They're not going to be content with their entire society burning down. They will use police and increase police presence and bring in armed forces if necessary to get a handle on these things. Nobody's asking for right-wing randos to intervene here.
Is the conclusion of what we've been saying would happen. It's happening, so we're right, and there is distraction.
Please, guys, look forward, viewers. I need you to stand back and stand by.
There is destruction of the very regime that ultimately is not persecuting those minorities. In fact, it is bolstering.
As if the police stop the causes. That's not the job. It's not the police job to address causes. We don't know the causes of crime, right? But we do know what stops crime, and that's to put dangerous criminals in prison for a very long time, right? If we simply lock up the super predators for a long time, we will crush crime. We get to choose how much crime we have, right? We could live in the United States in a society that is 10 times safer than it is right now by simply locking up super predators. In the United Kingdom, you could live in a society that is 10 times safer than it is right now if you mustered the political and cultural will to lock up super predators for longer periods. You would crush crime. Very simple. And Republicans, for all their flaws, they all pretty much seem to be on board with tougher law enforcement and policing and punishment of violent criminals than parties on the left.
It is emboldening those minorities. It is giving them chances that they wouldn't have had otherwise. This regime is really oppressing us, white, European, heterosexual.
As if the police stop grooming gangs. Well, why are so many women vulnerable to grooming gangs? Because they don't have much of a life in their families, right? If these women had any sort of connection to their families, they wouldn't be picked up by grooming gangs. And if men protected their families, they would not permit the thriving of grooming gangs, right? Citizens taking action legally, forming safety patrols, could put a stop to grooming gangs. And politically taking action, stopping immigration and insisting on higher punishment for violent criminals would put a major dent in this bad behavior.
People, but let this regime be totally destroyed or partially at least weakened by whatever amount of force these rioters are capable of deploying.
Right, so JF has some interesting thoughts on the French race riots.
I mean, it's possible. If the fireworks are meant to create that kind of sound and that kind of look, fascinating. I didn't know. It's good to know. Thank you for letting me know. Super Channel says, take my magic beans. Do you think Ukrainian women will be an option due to the war? The longer it goes on, the more women available. I think that there will be very few... I think they will definitely be adding to the market. And when you add to the market, more offer, that leaves space for lower price. And
I'm not saying just trust the police. I'm saying just trust reality. And the reality is that you can't stop rampaging violent criminals as a civilian, right? So what alternative do you have? So trust reality, avoid violent criminals the best you can to the extent that it's legal. Join safety patrols in your community, like take up arms if it's legal, get trained in self-protection, in communal protection, look after your families, earn as much money as you can legally and morally and in an upstanding fashion, and develop better and better relations with the people around you That's the best way to stay safe in turbulent times and in good times.
And therefore, you may acquire a Ukrainian woman or a woman that got her mail taken by a Ukrainian woman. So whenever this kind of event happens, a disbalance in the sexes, it's good. It's good for the other sex when there are more members of their opposite sex. That being said, there is the possibility that they come from a very corrupt, very low-level, high-criminality country.
Safety patrol sounds like a lawsuit in the making or career-ending viral social media video. No, do it right. There are all sorts of safety patrols all around the United States. Do it legally, do it correctly, do it in connection with law enforcement. You've got the Guardian Angels in New York City. Jewish communities have their own safety patrols, and they take many steps to try to keep their community safe. You should take legal steps to keep your community, your street safe.
And that might mean you will be dealing with a female who has pre-evolved to fuck you up in ways that you can't even conceive of as a way.
So I think this notion that Ukrainian women are just evolved to F you up, far more likely, just disproportionately compared to American women, I think that's delusional here by JF. Yeah, there will be some culture clash with Eastern European women compared to Western European women. I just don't think it's at all clear that Eastern European women are just, so much more dangerous.
Western European. So you have to be careful for this. Ukrainian values are not the same as Western European values. And, there was this East.
Yeah, you have to be careful with who you allow into your life. You have to be careful with whom you go to bed. You have to be careful with whom you choose to have children, right? You should be very careful about the people you allow into your life, whether they are Ukrainian, Eastern European, or not.
Eastern European girl with a fat guy on TV. And it was clear to anyone of the audience that she was with him.
What if a gentleman of color gets up in your grill demanding that you kiss his boot? You should look at your alternatives. In some alternatives, the best thing for you to do would be to kick him in the balls, punch him in the face, and beat him down. In other situations, depending on who you are, what the situation is, the best thing would be to kiss his boot. Right? There's a time and a place to fight, and there's a time and a place to acquiesce, and there's a time and a place to run, and there's a time and a place to call police. But the better connected you are to other people, right, the more you will find out what's going on in the world around you, and the more likely other people will be to come to your aid, just as the more likely you will be to come to other people's aid. So the answer to this problem, along with every other problem, from earthquakes to how do you survive inflation, unemployment, technological disruption, get connected to your family, your extended family, build friends, build community, be a valuable part of your church, your synagogue, volunteer, right? Get rooted, get connected.
Him for the green card. And at some point, she basically says it to him.
You should never walk alone, right? You shouldn't walk alone. You should walk with other people. You should form common cause with other people. You should get bonded with other people. You should create shared reality with other people. And you should protect other people. And the more that you protect and look out for other people, if they're at all decent, the more likely they are to look out and protect you.
He starts crying. You have to be careful. They may be, yes, DK Shadow, they are born.
Yeah. So Luke makes fun of me here, Luke Croft. Lick the boot, give him your car keys and atone for your whiteness. Sometimes that is a better outcome than getting murdered, right? You think you should stand and deliver and risk, getting murdered, right? I think it's best to stay alive. And sometimes staying alive means, accepting very humiliating terms. So between accepting humiliation and getting murdered, I say accept some humiliation. Also, get connected with reality and the people around you so that you don't place yourself in situations where these sorts of things happen.
Sleeper agents. They can wreck your life. They will wreck your life. They will wreck your heart, and they will use you to whatever end they want. But sometimes among that use, sometimes a window of opportunity opens.
Okay, so what type of woman comes along and just uses you and wrecks your life? A woman who's on about the same level of emotional maturity as you, right? We cannot stand to spend much time with people who are less mature than ourselves, right? It's just too irritating, infuriating, disgusting, repellent. Like they're underachieving, they're maladaptive behavior stinks in our nostrils and we want to get away. So whoever we bring into our lives is a reflection of us. So JF wants to point the finger at, oh, it's women, they're the cause of so much misery. It's these Ukrainian women, these Eastern European women, they'll F you up. Well, if you allow, bad women into your life, that says a great deal about you. There's something about you that is unhealthy, doesn't have a proper sense of boundaries, doesn't have self-respect, and therefore doesn't treat other people respectfully, and therefore you're wide open to people coming along and abusing you. All right, let me play a little more here
for
from
baby
JF.
making. But yeah, males are dying in Ukraine because they've been selected by force to stay there and defend. And the women have been immigrating or staying in Ukraine. So the overall mathematical aspect is relatively positive for the males outside of this group. Callum Oxworth says, did you see the video of...
And Luke Croft mocks me, give up all your honor to live for another day. Yeah, Luke Croft, is there anyone who loves you? What do the people who love you want you to do? Do they want you to take a courageous stand and get murdered? I believe you're in your 20s, right? Do the people who love you want you to risk your life in some pointless, courageous stand? Or do they want you to stay alive so that they can continue to, have you around and to love you and to build things together with you? If you have people who love you, I suspect you should ask them what they would want you to do. Do they want you to take a pointless, courageous stand that ends your life in your 20s? Or would they prefer to see you stay alive for 60 years and make contributions to their lives, to the community, to the world?
Of the rioters cutting down a CCTV pole and hits... It is something that you'll hear even in high-class context with rich French people, with highly cultured or educated,
okay, this is
very
good.
undertone to political conversation. No, maybe yes, a building.
This is a really good bit here from JF coming up.
Waterway says, sends $5. Thank you so much. He says, is this France's George Floyd moment? It is, but you have to understand that France is different than America. France has a very revolutionary undertone to political conversation. Revolution is not a taboo in France. It is kind of a taboo. Politically, you go nowhere in America if you are siding with the revolution. In France, it is an everyday subject of conversation. People will remind themselves of, oh yeah, you remember when we cut these heads from the aristocrats? Maybe we should do a little more of this, French people constantly talk about killing people and killing the elite. It is something that you'll hear even in high-class context with rich French people, with highly cultured or educated French people, whereas in America, you're going to consider this as a taboo expression of low-level violence. So because of this, there is a revolutionary tradition in France of supporting, of kind of hypocritically supporting the violence, saying nothing about it, not wanting it to stop. There's much more support for what we see, for anarchy in general, than you would have in America. In America, you still have the sense of law and order. In France, law and order is the taboo. Because the French imaginary...
Okay, there's a fascinating perspective here from JF, but Luke Croft is bringing some interesting points in the chat. He says, does a person ever get off their knees once they have accepted the way of life of bowing to reality? Yeah, they do. If you have a job, you are effectively a slave to your boss 40 hours a week. All right? Someone who stays married, all right, they do it by keeping their mouth shut when their spouse, makes horrible accusations at times, where their spouse is just, out of his mind or out of her mind. Right? The way you maintain friends, the way you maintain life in community, all right, is by biting your tongue at times and putting up with someone, saying things about you that aren't true. So, yeah. Having a job is effectively a form of slavery. It's humiliating for the great talented soul who believes that he's worthy of so much more, but it's just simply accepting of reality. If you love your children, you will change their diapers, right? You will wade through their feces and their urine, and you will clean it up again and again, thousands and thousands of times. You will go through that humiliation because you love your kids. So why would you not be willing to go through humiliation so that you can have the opportunity to wade through rivers of feces and urine and raise your own kids? But that means that you must have, higher priority than feeling like a hero in some delusional stand in, you know, a wacky and wild world.
Is obsessed with the idea that collaboration with law and order is the greatest sin. They have acquired this with mimetics around their collaboration with the Nazis in World War II, but it has developed in you don't steal someone, you don't call the police, you don't complain that you've been the victim of a crime. Those are very much French values right now. So a George Floyd moment in France is very different from a George Floyd moment in America because there is hidden dark support for.
So every man wants to be a hero, right? Every man wants to take a stand against evil. But how about being a hero in the way you conduct your daily life? Like, you want to die for the West, but how about living for the West? You want to die for your country. How about living for your country? You want to die for your people. How about living for your people? You want to die for your family. How about living for your family? Right? So instead of like going out in a blaze of glory, why not start creating a glorious life, one action at a time, one word at a time, one habit at a time, one commitment at a time, one relationship at a time, one, you know, charitable donation at a time, one act of helping somebody else at a time, getting connected to your neighbors, to your community, to your synagogue or your church, one volunteer opportunity at a time, one book at a time, one essay at a time. How about becoming a hero by building a heroic, upstanding life where you are a good friend to yourself, and where from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed, you feel good about how you've conducted yourself. So more than 90% of the time, from the time I get up in the morning, from 3 a.m. until 9 p.m., I feel pretty good about everything I've done during that time. I haven't eaten too much. I haven't talked too much. I haven't under-exercised. I haven't, overindulged. I haven't, masturbated. I haven't looked at pornography. I feel solid, all right, about every choice that I've made most of the time, right? It's a life that builds together as a symphony. It's a heroic life. So instead of going out in a blaze of glory, why don't you live for your family, live for your friends, live for your community, live for your people, live for your church, for your synagogue, create an honorable life that is heroic day in and day out.
A lot of what you're seeing right now. I'm not saying that the French people are okay with their stuff being broken, but I'm saying the French people fundamentally sees the police as a third party, a third hostile party. They may have some problems with the riots. They're going to say, all right, the rioters have been bugging my life, I hate them. But they're going to have much more trouble with the police. And the police, they're like at the lowest level of respect in France. So that's how it works. That's how the cultural thing differs. And that's how it can lead to a much more political friction and much more impact on the society. So here we have a live video. So there's been riots everywhere, followed by live stream all night. And it is still the night as we speak there.
So I've never recorded being forced to kiss anyone's boot, all right? If you're humiliated, in all likelihood, it's because you've gotten out of touch with reality. You are somewhere you shouldn't be. You have said words you should not have said. You have acted in a way you should not have acted. You are out after midnight in parts of town that you should not be out in after midnight. So in all likelihood, any humiliations that you are going through are the result of your choices. So it's so much easier to blame it on, the blacks, the elites, the Jews, the gays, the trans, the whatever. In all likelihood, the overwhelming amount of humiliation that you face in your life is because of your choices, right? It's not the outgroups. It's not the elites, right? It's not the government. It's not the politicians. It's not the bureaucrats. It's not the media, right? Your humiliations overwhelmingly will result because you have gotten out of touch with reality. You have placed yourself in positions you should not be because of your own bad choices. You have said things that you should not have said. Right? You have not accumulated the skills that you needed to accumulate to lead a good and honorable and prosperous life. You have not put in the hard work to build a prosperous life. You have not built the relationships with family, with friends, with community, all right, with people in your profession that would enable you to thrive and to live a good life. So in all likelihood, the overwhelming majority of humiliations that you have suffered are because of your choices, not because of something that society in the first world has imposed upon you.
Police reinforcements heading to Lyon, France. That was maybe today. The reinforcements in tanks So people were noting a very interesting note on this today. You got the coverage of the Prigozhin civil war against Putin. But the Prigozhin civil war against Putin, there's a handful of explosions that have been involved, maybe a couple of shootings here and there, but that is it. And it was covered as a civil war. How is it that if I go on CNN right now, I don't see that France is in a civil war? It's because the parties that are at war in France is
probably the reason you go on CNN, you don't see that France is in a civil war, is because France is not in a civil war. It has a criminal problem. It has a law enforcement problem. It has race riots, but it's not a civil war. Now, I know it's very exciting to say France is being convulsed by a civil war. It makes you sound like, incredibly important commentator who can reveal truths that, the establishment is hiding from you. But the reason that normal journalists don't talk about America being in a civil war or France being in a civil war is because they are not in a civil war. They have crime problems.
The racial minority of the country, which is very much supported by leftists and by leftist media. And so they won't cover it as a civil war, but I mean, they have basically more explosion, more destruction than you've seen done by Prigozhin or anything like this. And yet they were like, oh my God, Russia is about to fall. If Russia was about to fall because some private general of a mercenary army shot maybe one plane with maybe one member of the Russian army, what is this? This is a country that's completely fallen. This is a country in ruin. Liberal France gave them refuge. People are talking about how there is a lot of the Middle Eastern population of France that is participating to these riots. Hundreds of buildings like this have been burnt in France in the last few days.
No, France has a law enforcement problem. Right? We think about how much better the United States would have been if it had handled 9/11 as a law enforcement issue, but it didn't. It had to be a clash of civilizations. It had to be Islamofascism. It had to be, we have to fight them over there so we don't fight them over here. So all the overheated rhetoric about Islam following 9/11 did us no good, right? It led us to pointless, stupid, idiotic, self-destructive invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. We would have been so much better off if we had treated 9/11 as a law enforcement issue, tightened up on the people we allowed into the country, like tightened up on enforcing visas, tightened up on the severity with which we patrolled airports and entrance to the United States, right? So too, I suspect France and the United States and other countries would do well to primarily treat these race riots as matters for law enforcement to deal with. Tackle them, get the bad guys, put them away for a very long time, and you'll crush our crime rates.
All right, what else do we have? Zemmour on the riots. We are in the early stages of a civil war. That's obvious. It's an ethnic war. We can see clearly that it's a race war. We see what forces are involved. We need someone determined and firm. The problem, above all, is the number. Absolutely proper analysis here by Eric Zemmour. France has fallen to African migrants and is now an
Bjorn, I couldn't imagine being a bitter old man ranting to 20 people on YouTube about anti-Semitism. I guess someone has to do it. What channel are you watching? I don't recall anyone ranting about anti-Semitism. So I'm sure there's a target that would be appropriate for your missile. But if anyone has been as open and welcoming of free and fair criticism of all groups, including Jews, right, that would be me. I can't think anyone who has more extended themselves, more bent over backwards to open up free, open, fair criticism of all sacred cows and all groups compared to what I've done on social media over the past, 8 years?
Islamic Caliphate. When I told you, young people in France can very well be armed with AK-47s or the likes.
Hey, we've got Elliott Blatt No, Elliott, you said you were backstage and you're gone. Oh, here. There you are. Foolish me. I'm in error. Elliott Blatt, what's going on, bro?
Oh, blessings, bro. Blessings. Good points, bro. Really, really crisp presentation tonight. Enjoying it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I happened to catch Richard last night, and Richard was basically dunking on the Zoomers, and I do sort of agree with him. And the Zoomers seem to have this attitude as though they don't have to pay their dues. They're just sort of entitled to go at the top. And I don't think our generation, being an Xer and all, I don't think we ever had such notions. I really think that we kind of understood that you needed to earn your way to the top, and or even earn your way to the middle. And it was the basic point. And these Zoomers, not to criticize them, but they weren't properly educated. I think the first generation that their secondary school was probably really infused with Marxism to a degree that ours as Xers wasn't. What do you think?
I've never thought deeply about the generations, but we all have our blind spots, and my mind just doesn't relate to generations as being a significant category. It probably is, it may very well be, but my mind just doesn't work that way. It would be like talking to me about different flavors of men's cologne or perfume. A lot of my friends talk to me about generational differences, and I'm just blank when it comes to that topic. I'm sorry.
I can sort of see your point, but I don't think it's also, I don't think the idea is without merit either. I think there is something to generations, and I don't want to say it's necessarily dispositive, but there is something there. And I just reflect on my own personal experience with the 30 and under set and how fundamentally disappointing it is. And I think there's something there. I think there's these kids, I think kids that grew up with the internet and the amount of instant gratification that the internet has, that they've lived with and come to expect, don't have the ability to appreciate bitterness and hard work. And I think that's a
I
real
don't see any difference with our generation. One of the fact of being a teenager in your early 20s is that you have an overestimation of your own abilities and how special you are, and how the ordinary rules are not going to apply to you, and you're not going to be, hamstrung and lead, a life like your parents. So I think just part of being young is to have, a sense of drama and a sense of your own specialness. And I had it at 18, 22, 25 as well. I think you probably did too. I'm sure there are some ways that our generation was superior, and there's some ways that our generation was inferior. Like I meet plenty of, upstanding, impressive 18, 20, 25-year-olds. I don't find anything overall inferior about them compared to other generations.
I'm not saying that exceptions don't exist, but I think it's a valid observation. I honestly do. I think the ease with which things are brought to, or the ease with which things have been brought to kids post-internet, has skewed their perception of how difficult the world really is and what it took to bring us to where we are. I think there is a lack of appreciation for what has been built and what has been given to them. And I think it's a mistake to sort of discount this criticism.
I don't discount it. I just don't see it, because I don't think that we had the qualities, meaning our generation had those qualities when we were 18 to 25. Do you really think that we had appropriate respect for the hard work that is necessary to create a good life when we were 18 to 25? Not us necessarily as individuals, but as a generation.
I don't think we have the option. I think we had to, because I think life was considerably more difficult. I honestly do. And I'm not trying to be the guy, the get off my lawn, the old, when I was a kid type of guy here. But it's true that we didn't grow up with cell phones. We didn't grow up with internet. We grew up with, landline telephones and 3 channels on the television, and just a very limited array of dopamine opportunities that these kids seem to have been suffused in since birth.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, but there are many advantages to the way we grew up, and there are advantages to the opportunities that they have. I don't think it's like, one way is just inherently more productive of good people than the other. Like, we benefited from those restrictions of freedom, and we lacked opportunities that this generation has. I mean, how much interaction have you had with Zoomers, and what is a Zoomer? Is it people in their 20s?
Yeah, to me, a Zoomer is somebody under 30. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that's the actual definition, but to me, that's what I'm thinking of, And I've had a very narrow set of interactions with people under 30, but, I've, well, how do I say this? But like, these kids, like, I've now, quote unquote, employed 2 quote unquote Zoomers, right?
Yeah.
And the terms of conversation are not like, oh, what can I do for you? It's like, what can you, meaning me, do for them, right? There's a total inversion of the sort of traditional employer-employee relationship that was thoroughly unthinkable in my days as a 20-year-old.
Wait, when you were 20, were you thinking a great deal at your work about what you can do for your employer?
I'm thinking, yeah, well, I'm thinking, what can I get out of it? But I fundamentally understood that, my value, my paycheck was completely determined by what I could do for my employer. Like, I had no illusions about who stood where in the hierarchy. And today's Zoomers come to you and they believe that they're peers, and they're not peers. They've taken no risk, right? They see themselves as entitled to a certain lifestyle, and it's up to me to provide that for them. Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, I just know how incredibly selfish and self-centered I am. Like, I have not spent my, career as an employee thinking about how I can be of service to my employer. I've thought about how I can get laid when I'm at work. I thought about how I can, form intense relationships at work so that I can, do the things that I want to do and avoid the unpleasant things. I thought about how I can maximize my income and benefits and, have a harmonious work situation that's, most congenial to me. I have spent very little time thinking about how I can be of service to my employer. And in the last 7 years that I've been able to raise that from, say, 0.1% to, perhaps 2, 3, 4, 5% of the time has made a dramatic difference in the quality of my life. But I'm still a 95% selfish person.
Well, I mean, I think you're basically giving us testimony as to how far divorced from reality you've been.
Well, then how inclined, have you been to putting your employer's interests first? I mean, you must have.
Well, to be honest, I feel like I've been realistic. I feel like I've recognized the totality of the situation, of what it means to both manage a business and work for a business and try to keep a business afloat. Like, I honestly recognize the risks other people have been taking, and I respect those risks, and I respect and appreciate people who have taken risks, and therefore I'm willing to make sacrifices. You know, I understand the ecosystem in which I'm able to make a living, and I act accordingly.
I mean, I'm trying to remember. Is this, the Elliott Blatt who was just so enraged by employment situations in the past?
Don't get me wrong. Don't think that I don't have unpleasant work situations, right? But my unpleasant work situations, I believe, come from people either intentionally or unintentionally being incredibly obtuse and obnoxious.
And how much is it a result of your choices and your attitude and your behavior? These unpleasant work situations.
Far less than you're implying, bro.
Yeah, I'm implying that you're primarily responsible for the quality of your work life.
I'm not saying I'm not, but I'm not saying that I'm solely responsible either.
No, I'm saying you're effectively 80% plus, because if your work life sucks, you should, get something better.
Yeah, so I should abandon my commitments.
Oh, so what commitments do you have? Like, is there a reason that you should stay in a hellish situation when there could be a much more pleasant and remunerative situation elsewhere? Yeah, no, I don't think you owe it to your employer to stay in a hellish situation if there's a better situation elsewhere.
So rather than try to fix a hellish situation, I should just
Yeah.
throw it all out. Just fuck it. Just throw it out the window, bro.
Yeah, if you've got a better alternative. I think the odds of you changing a hellish situation at work are very small. But if you have what from all empirical evidence is a far superior option elsewhere, you should take that. There's no way you should stay in a hellish situation, whether it's relationships or work. You should get something better.
Bro, you're giving me the advice of an under-earner, bro.
Wait, no, I said something better, something that pays you better and treats you better.
Yeah,
that's the very opposite of under-earning.
That's just no, but you basically your attitude's very mercenary.
No,
right?
my attitude is very self-respecting.
If everyone was as mercenary as you, bro, nothing would get done. Nothing would be built. There's a time for sacrifice.
But why should you? Yeah, you should sacrifice for your family. I don't know why you should sacrifice for people who are simply employing you when you have far better opportunities elsewhere. I mean, that makes no sense. Like, it's not like Japan, where workers and employers have a deep, often lifelong commitment to each other. This is the United States of America, where work relationships are overwhelmingly transactional, and employers will get rid of you tomorrow if that's in their self-interest.
All true, but there is no knowledge without sacrifice. There is no great achievement without sacrifice. So if you're basically advancing sort of the careerist, what's the word? It's a Pyrrhic victory. You're advancing. So you're saying basically, if a situation rubs you the wrong way, you should abandon it, right?
No, I said if it's a hellish situation, if it's hell, if you're in an ongoing hellish situation over months and there is a far superior alternative, you should take it.
Obviously, Luke, you're not breaking news here, right? But there's a difference between hell. There's hell and then there's struggle, right? Like my struggle, bro. But what I'm saying is like everyone seems to be really accustomed to throwing in the towel as soon as something is even remotely unpleasant. That's all I'm talking about. And like the difference between, right, when I was growing up, there was a certain acknowledgement and respect for grit. You had to have a certain amount of grit, and grit was like a necessary component of your character if you're going to be somebody or be worthy of respect.
Okay, so let's talk about ratio of grit and unpleasantness to joy. And I would say that my ratio when it comes to earning money over the past 8 years of joy to hell has been something like 10 to 1, like 10 times as much joy for every bit of hell.
Right, but my dear, would you agree or disagree that the position you have at your sort of relatively advanced age is really a function of how much grit you brought to bear in your earlier years?
Yeah, I went through some, unpleasant times. I did some hard work. So, yeah, but I don't believe that one should go through an awful, hellish experience if there is a superior alternative. So working out is challenging and hard, and developing skills is often hard, and doing well at school is often, unpleasant and hard, but don't make it unnecessarily unpleasant and unnecessarily hard. One has to use, good judgment.
No, I agree there. Absolutely. I mean, you do have to use discernment, right? But I mean, you've chronicled the various, the various trials and tribulations that you've endured to sort of reach this particular plateau that you're on, right? And when I was growing up, it was just sort of understood that you had to undergo a certain period of hardship if you were meant to achieve anything. And that was sort of a basic assumption, and that I'm sort of quasi asserting that with the easy access to easy endorphins, kids just kind of want the reward immediately, and they're not so much down for the grit.
And what's your own attitude towards reward versus doing the hard work?
I learned to love the grit, bro.
And so how does that?
I was totally like everybody else, right? I wanted to do as little as possible,
yeah,
and get as much for it,
yeah,
and get as much as possible, right?
And when did that change?
When did that change? It changed. I don't know, mid-30s. Because here's why: if you're ever overpaid, right? The problem with being overpaid is the insecurity of knowing you're overpaid.
Yeah, and that it'd be in your boss's best interest to replace you or get rid of you.
Yeah, you'd rather be underpaid.
Yeah.
Right? And feel secure knowing that you're delivering more than what you're being paid for, than being overpaid and knowing that you're on a tightrope that could easily snap.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there are a lot of components there. Like you may feel or have all sorts of evidence that you're being overpaid, but if you're still providing a valuable function,
well, it's not that you're providing it. It's in my experience, I've had periods in my life where I've been overpaid, but when you're being overpaid, the people overpaying you are working double time to figure out how to not have you around. Right, and you're in a much more precarious position than you think you are in.
Yeah,
and
there's
so
something to that. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm basically trying to echo your message of realism here, like failing to appreciate the reality of the entire economic situation that you find yourself in will bite you. Ultimately, even if you do manage to squeak out a few good years of being overpaid.
Yeah, so one of the things that I hate is, dealing with idiots. So I've managed to create a life where I have very few interactions with unpleasant people. And so one of the ways that I did that is that I charge top dollar for my Alexander Technique lessons. Like I charge more than most other Alexander Technique teachers, because I find when I charge top dollar, I get a far better quality of client. And so in many areas in my life over the last 8 years, I find when I charge more than average, I deal with better quality clients. Now, landing those higher quality clients takes more work, and I have to provide a superior quality product. I can't just go through the motions. But it's been really important to me to minimize my interactions with people who I find highly unpleasant. So I've been willing to make the sacrifices, do the hard work to create a life where I have very few frustrating, painful, infuriating interactions with idiots.
Well, you certainly can't lose in that regard. Yeah, and that is very funny. There's a meme out there like, like it's the people that you give the breaks to. I can't remember the specific meme, but the lower you charge for your services, the more complaints you get.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's the higher you charge,
Yeah.
it's like they can't wait to keep coming back. Yeah.
I
Like how to crack that nut is basically the riddle of, that's what determines the winners and the losers.
Yeah, there's Frank. I think it's Frank Kern. He's an online marketer, and he found that when he sold products for $39.95 or $69.95, it's just nothing but aggravation. But when he sold products that only cost $3,000 or more, he just virtually had no aggravation. He could run into people who bought his products, at the beach or at the store, and they'd just be friendly, nice people. And so too with me. When I started out as a practice Alexander technique teacher, I mean, I went down to $25 a lesson. And this one student I had, he asked for half lessons for $12.50. And then he would take the time to write a checkout. He wanted to write the checkout for $12.50 at the end of each lesson. And he'd also take phone calls during our lessons. Like, just infuriating. It's like, I mean, that experience, like, no way in hell, not doing that anymore. Not giving discounted lessons, just went straight to $100. So our teachers told us, just don't charge any more than $75 a lesson. I just went to $100, and I may have lost out on a lot of students, right? A lot of other teachers just charged 60 or 50 or 75, probably got more students. But every student I've had that I've charged $100 a lesson for has just been a pleasure to work with.
I don't doubt it. And it's a very important point, because I've certainly made that mistake. I've way undercharged in the past, and it's just brought me in contact with the scum of the earth. It's so not worth it.
And insisting that, say, a potential employer, live up to their obligations. Let them know that this is not on. This is not what I signed up for. This is not the deal. Right. Mm-hmm. So developing this sense of self-respect that you automatically develop when you treat yourself with respect, you just automatically start insisting that other people treat you with respect, or if they don't, you walk away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's also an important point. But conversely, like, back to the Zoomer question, like, there is something about being underqualified, right? There's something about being worthy, and I think there's a lot of these younger kids that assume that they're much more worthy than they actually are.
But didn't everyone our age at 18 have this exactly the same attitude? Like, to be 18 is to have a vast, exaggerated sense of your own capabilities.
I'm not saying I didn't have this. I didn't also have this attitude, but I got smacked down by reality, bro. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, isn't it kind to get smacked down early rather than just allow someone to sort of drag on this sort of inflated and detached from reality view of themselves?
Well, I think that's why
is there a place for hard truths?
Yeah, that's why many people retreat into a world of pornography and video games to try to escape the hard truths of life.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
Instead of having a relationship with a girlfriend, like, a girlfriend is going to test you. She's going to push you. She's going to challenge you. she's going to infuriate you. You know, it's so much easier to wank and play video games.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
And then justify it by saying, I'm saving myself for marriage. That's what cracks me up. I mean, completely secular people who claim that they're saving themselves for marriage because they don't want the aggravation and the vulnerability that comes with having an intimate relationship with a woman.
That's also true, bro.
I mean, it's hilarious. Like, they're giving me the line, I'm saving myself for marriage, from someone who's secular. Like, if you've got a religious commitment, I get it. But if you don't have a religious commitment, then this idea that you're saving yourself for marriage is 99% likely completely fatuous. You're frightened of intimacy and vulnerability that comes with how much you enjoy having sex with this woman, and then how much power that you feel like that gives her over you.
Also true, bro. Also true. Hey, I drove to Carmel today. You ever been to Carmel?
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. Love Carmel.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I didn't even know places like that existed, bro. It's like a white ghetto.
Yeah.
It's so nice. I couldn't believe it. Like, I'd always heard about it. This is where Clint Eastwood lives, apparently.
Yes.
I wanted to move there instantly. I would totally move there, but it's totally out of reach, I'd imagine. It's like on par with like Beverly Hills or something. So nice.
Oh yeah, there's so many lovely places in California. I mean, but Carmel, Monterey, Big Sur.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's about a little 2 hour plus drive from the city. And oh man, I gotta just move there.
Was it good for your soul? I mean, did you feel like a different man?
Bro. I did. I felt like there's something to strive for now. It was a little taste. A little taste of something else I needed, bro. Needed a new headspace. But I didn't run to Clint, sadly. But it was like you could just feel it. Like, you walking around and like everyone looked good, you know. It's just like high IQ was like bursting at every corner. It was so, you know, it was just such a refreshing break, bro. I can understand why you like LA, even though I find LA atrocious. Well, you're not even in LA, you're in like a particular quadrant of LA. But
I mean, I love beautiful things. I mean, it's so nice to have the opportunity to travel and be around beautiful things, because we're different people in different places. Like, I'm a different person in Sydney. I'm a different person in Carmel. You're probably a different person in Carmel compared to the filth in San Francisco.
Yeah, I did. I felt like I felt dirty, bro. I felt like I was bringing the stink of San Francisco into Carmel. So,
yeah,
so anyway,
it's good to travel. Good to get out of the grind. Like, good to do something different, expose yourself to something different, and experience yourself as a completely different person.
Yeah, but I used to think of San Francisco as being the Carmel, you know, but it's not.
Well, it was at one point.
Yeah, so it's just amazing how quickly things taken a nosedive. Like, I used to think of San Francisco as like sacred ground, as holy ground, and now it's been, you know, despoiled.
Well, seasons change, feelings change. It's been so long since I found you, yet it seems like yesterday. Seasons change, people change. I'll sacrifice tomorrow just to have you here on this show today.
Are you trying to taunt me into giving you another Carpenters quote?
I just want to feel you by my side. I've got to have your insights right now. Just been so long since I found you.
So anyway, I've been listening to lots of Carpenters, and like, I'm like, how did we lose all this, bro? Like, this is incredible music. And where did we go wrong, bro?
Yeah, I mean, we want to create a life that creates, you know, room and embodies, you know, Carpenters songs. I mean, It's
Yeah,
such
like
a
only
sweet life.
yeah, yeah. Listen to Only Just Begun and just tell me
Oh,
that wasn't
yeah.
like just the most uplifting song ever recorded. Uh,
And you know, it was based on, they saw an ad for a couple moving into a house. It was an ad for a real estate company, a mortgage loan company.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, did
on
they write it?
TV.
They
Yeah.
weren't usually the writers of some of their top hits, but did they write that particular song?
I believe so. I'd have to do some research, but you know, I
Yeah.
love watching docos on the Carpenters.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
there are a lot of
I mean,
great
I watched.
documentaries. There's even a movie, a TV movie that I believe is on YouTube. It's definitely worth watching.
Okay, I'll look it up. I'll look it up. But yeah, just you go back and you see like the Ed Sullivan Show and all of that stuff, and like I'm such a like boomer now, but just what joyous, what a spirit that existed back then that just doesn't seem to exist now. It's so nice.
So it began as a wedding themed TV commercial for Crockett National Bank in California. And
Yeah,
the song played over footage of a young couple getting married. So Richard Carpenter saw the TV commercial and guessed correctly that Paul Williams was the vocalist. And then
yeah,
he asked whether there was a full length version of the song because the TV commercial only had 2 verses. And so they got together and created a full length song, which is just gorgeous.
yeah. He was interesting himself.
Mm-hmm.
He as an arranger. I'm only beginning to learn, but you know they're from Connecticut. I was born in Connecticut, and like you know I can sort of feel the Connecticut essence of the Carpenters, nonetheless. Even though I only lived there for like less than 2 years, like the first 2 years of my life. But there's something about Connecticut. Like there was just a certain style and class about Connecticut back in those days. It doesn't surprise me that they're from Connecticut.
But imagine how annoying it was for Richard and Karen Carpenter because so many interviewers would ask why are a brother and sister singing love songs to each other? What's really going on here?
Yeah, I know that is weird. It was shocking.
Imagine how awkward that would be. Like every time you're doing an interview, asking what's the exact nature of your relationship with your sister?
Are there any other brothers? Well, I guess the Jackson 5 were brothers and sisters, right? But are there any other sibling bands out there?
Probably, but it is kind of awkward, a brother and sister singing about love songs to each other.
Yeah, it is, and they're not technically to each other, but it's not weird. But yeah, there's definitely, yeah. If you want to be cynical, if you want to take a sort of 2023 sort of 4chan look at the situation, yeah, you could be cynical about the whole thing. But I don't know, bro. You know, there's
we've only just begun here, bro.
We've only just begun, bro. We've only just begun. All right, man. That's all I got, man.
Okay, man. Blessings.
All right. Blessings. Shalom.
Okay, take care.